Hey everybody, welcome. Thank you very much for joining. My name is Matthew. We're going to take a few videos to go through and deconstruct the United States money supply. Now, in subsequent videos, I will explain a little bit more whether some of this money printing is good or bad. I'm going to try to avoid these value judgments during these videos. I just want these to be purely educational, purely analytical as far as what is what. And we're going to go through these perhaps nebulous terms that you have heard of but don't know what they mean. That is M0, M1, M2, and even M3 for the United States. But we're going to start with M0 today. And as a bonus, you're also going to get the monetary base. Two different things. Let's take a look at what we have here. This chart goes back to January 1959, and it is M0. Little background on these money supplies. Paul Volcker, a legendary chairman of the Fed now since passed, saved the dollar in many ways in the 80s. In the 70s, the stagflation of the 70s took interest rates to 20%. Very harsh, but also very proper medicine at the time after the gold standard ended 10 years before. During his tenure at the Fed and career, he, as many other bright economists there, they put these money supplies into different categories, okay? M0, M1, M2, and M3. All the other central banks around the world today now use this terminology, thank you, or thanks to them, okay? So, and Paul Volcker was one of the leading people to do this, okay? So it's just an interesting background, in my opinion, and it started right about this time, okay? The 60s. So what is M0? All right, M0, you've probably heard it. You might confuse it with the monetary base, but what is M0? It's a very specific definition. It is all physical currency that is cash and coin, that is notes, those Benjamins, $1 bill, 5, 10, Federal Reserve notes, plus the coins that are outside of bank vaults. That means in circulation, currency in circulation. Now, in the United States, there's yet another caveat here, in that I just said physical currency, both cash and coin. In point of fact, the Federal Reserve, the United States Central Bank, only prints notes. This is something that has been true since the beginning. They only print the bills, okay, the Benjamins. They only print the physical notes. The coins, the minting of the coins, that has a whole different history, a whole different trajectory we're not going to get into, used to be silver. Actually, back to the founding of the United States, it was a silver standard, not a gold standard. There was actual silver in the coins. Now there's just base metals, nickel and copper. Regardless, that is handled by the Treasury. Coins are handled still to this day, because of legacy reasons, by the Treasury. But when we count this stuff up, we put them together, and this is both notes and coins. Okay, so even though the Federal Reserve is the main entity that reports on these things, there is a little bit of money supply here from the Treasury. And indeed, if you were to look at this money supply, the vast majority of this currency outside of banks is in note form. One more thing just to conclude this before I move on. This is M0. This is physical cash and coin outside of bank vaults. How much is in bank vaults? A very small percentage. It's at times averaged 4% or perhaps even less, or 5%. It's grown a little bit as the money supply has grown. Especially, you can see here, there's a faster clip of physical currency that's simply being printed since the global financial crisis. The average right now, the total average of cash outside bank vaults, i.e. here, versus inside bank vaults, is about 6% to 94%. Okay, so what you see here is 94% of the physical cash and coin printed and minted. 6% is in bank vaults. Now, to show what is in bank vaults, I'm going to show you this item. It's going to show up as a negative on our money supply graph, and I'm going to draw it right now. Okay, so what is this? Let's go back to the 60s, 70s here. You see here, this item is bank reserves plus vault cash, okay? As I just said, vault cash is a very small proportion of M0, or physical cash in totality, that is printed, minted. 5%, let's say. So 95% is on the top. 5% is included in this black area. The reason I consolidated them is it's easier once we start layering out this money supply, but also it's just so small you wouldn't even see it, frankly. So that's vault cash. Very small percentage, all right, is included in this black shaded area below zero. What is the bank reserve? What are bank reserves? Well, those are very simply each account that every bank has with the central bank. And this is nation specific, okay? So this is the United States, so this is the Federal Reserve. This is the United States money supply. So this black shaded area is each account that Wells Fargo, Bank of America, JP Morgan Chase, so on and so forth, have with the Federal Reserve. This is their account with the central bank. So just like you and I have accounts with banks, those banks themselves have an account with the Fed, with the central bank. All right, and this is all reported on the Federal Reserve's balance sheet. You have to go back in time to look at these things a little bit. It's not so clear. It's not so consistent, I should say, so I worked hard to get these in the right order for you. But the main liability, let's say, for the Federal Reserve that is not cash, not that physical currency, is the bank reserve. And that is this black shaded area that is below. Okay, so again, above zero, we have above zero on this axis, we have M0. So you can simply see here that this is the largest proportion of what the Federal Reserve prints. All right, and then below zero on this axis, as I'm showing as a negative, is the bank reserve. And that will become more apparent why I'm showing one as a positive, one as a negative as we move forward in these videos. But trust me, for now, it makes sense to do it this way. As we can just roughly see here, M0 is far and away the larger proportion of cash that the Federal Reserve prints. And one thing to say again, this bank reserve idea, it's just a ledger entry. It's an account. Okay, it's just an account. It doesn't, you can call it digital. You can call, as you see here, the M0 is physical. The black shaded area is digital. But even before the internet, even before anything electronic, actually banks had accounts with the central bank, okay? And that was called the bank reserve account. So it's just a ledger entry. It's also something to keep in mind with the bank reserve portion. And as well, remember, to tie it all out, I'm also including the vault cash, that is the actual physical currency that is inside of bank vaults at any given time in the black shaded area. So what you have in totality now, you have physical cash outside of bank vaults, M0. Then you have vault cash inside bank vaults, about 6% of the total physical cash. That's inside the black. And then you also have the main portion of this black area that is the bank reserve. So three different components here. That is what I'm showing you on this chart. What are those three components in totality? That is the monetary base. Okay, it's a very important term that surely if you're a follower of this channel, you know that I talk about a lot, but it's important to show how this grows and what it means when it grows over time. So I'm going to reset the zoom here. Now, clearly, without knowing too much about banking, you can see that something changed after the global financial crisis. Something simply changed. Okay, so we had let's just zoom in all the way from the end of the 50s to the eve of the global financial crisis. You have constant growth here. It does seem that it's increasing a little bit more and then leveling off. You'll see that pattern a lot, interestingly, before crises. The physical currency is the vast majority of the monetary base, physical currency that is outside of banks. And then what is inside of banks, that's why it has this little vault icon, right? It's two things. It's the bank reserve account. That's the account that every bank holds with the Federal Reserve. And a little bit of vault cash, 6%, 5% of the total. Okay. See a little bit of spike in both physical cash and the bank reserve in the year 1999. That's because of Y2K, people getting scared, taking money out of banks. So they had to print more money to do so. But nonetheless, let's just zoom in just to this area before the global financial crisis. If we had to summarize generally what was happening here, even without looking at Y2K, which doesn't seem like much of a change, the growth seems pretty consistent, pretty gradual. Okay, and then clearly when you zoom out to the whole period up until today, or until June of this year, we see some craziness in the bank reserve portion of the monetary base. Just before we talk about the bank reserves, let me show you M0 again. Okay, I don't think I mentioned this at the beginning, but we see the gradual growth and then levels off a little bit. A global financial crisis hits. There's actually, you can see that there's definitely a faster clip of physical cash being printed after the financial crisis. Okay, after George Bush leaves office. Doesn't matter if it's Obama or Trump. It's faster. And then when COVID hits, you see a clip increase even faster. This is just physical cash outside of bank vaults, cash in circulation. So that's interesting. And the total, as of June 2024, $2.26 trillion. January 1950, $28 billion. June 2024, $2.26 trillion. Putting back the, this is the physical cash outside of banks, putting back the cash that is inside of banks. That's another way to put it. This is just cash in banks. Things go crazy here. And what is it? Well, essentially, it's bailing out banks with bad balance sheets from other bad investments. That's what's happening. Okay, so we see very clearly this, what was called QE1, QE2, and QE3. Okay, it's basically massive money printing that happened well outstripping the physical cash, which was increasing. But this digital or this ledger-based or this bank account balance that the Federal Reserve offered to banks. Okay, this was the main component of the bailouts of 2008 in the United States. Okay, it's very specific. And if you're wondering how this happened or how it is so, it literally is printing money. Okay, now I'm not trying to be blasé when I say that. You can clearly tell epistemologically, literally with no other information. If I just show this is the stock of physical cash that comes out of a printer or a minter, in the case of the Treasury with coins, it's increasing. What does that mean? That means money is literally being printed. It's the same thing with the bank reserves and vault cash. It's just this black shaded area is only available to the banks. Okay, that's why I'm showing it again, and it's going to be more clear in the future. This is why I'm showing it below the zero axis here. This is only bank money, base money available to banks. It's the negative in black. The rest of it that the Federal Reserve prints is available to us. That's the M0 portion. That's why that's positive. But if you wonder what this is, now I'm looking specifically, let's even take off M0. I'm looking specifically at this QE1, QE2, QE3. By the time QE3 happens, by the way, you have $2.8 trillion worth of money that's printed, whereas before the global financial crisis, $100 billion that was in banks. That is base money that is in banks. $100 billion before the crisis, $2.7 trillion 5 years after the crisis, 6 years after the crisis. Where does it come from? The answer is it's the same mechanics, the exact same mechanics as that physical currency. It's just printed. Not physically, but digitally. Hope you're finding these videos creative and to the point when it comes to navigating the rough waters of the financial system. And I'm happy to share with you a platform that can do the same when it comes to getting a loan secured by your Bitcoin, and that is Debifi. Debifi is a non-custodial, Bitcoin-backed lending platform designed for people who want to borrow against their Bitcoin while maintaining full control. Debifi offers institutional-grade liquidity through independent lenders, allowing for high-volume loans of up to 5 years. All transactions are secured by a unique multi-sig escrow system, ensuring that Bitcoin collateral remains safe and transparent. This setup guarantees that your Bitcoin is not rehypothecated, and you keep full visibility and control throughout the loan process. It's perfect for those who value security and transparency while exploring global stablecoin and fiat lending backed by Bitcoin. So head on over to debifi.com today to get started. It's money being printed, right? This is the core of the financial system of the U.S. There is nothing else behind this, okay? And we'll just leave it there for now. I'm not even going to talk about the assets that they buy with this money. I'm not going to talk about treasuries. I'm not going there. This is the money itself, okay? And so if we look what happened here from 2014, it's not true, first of all, that the Federal Reserve only prints money. They can destroy money. And this is, in fact, what they did. They destroyed the bank reserve portion of their balance sheet. And you can see it was about 2.87 trillion. Let's even see if we can catch it. Yeah, it seems like it's about 2.87 trillion. Almost $2.9 trillion was about the max in late 2014. They destroyed money. This is them trying to normalize their balance sheet. They were literally destroying a portion of the bank's money at this point, all the way back, or all the way until, I should say, September, October of 2019. Now, something very interesting happened here in 2019, which I'm not going to get into, but it will come back in many more future videos. We noticed a huge spike in the repo market. That is the interest rate for repurchase agreements, which we'll talk about, went over 10% overnight. It's a very short-term lending rate, usually not high at all. Went to over 10%. It was a signal that all was not well in the bank reserve market. People were very unwilling, and when I say people, I mean banks, money market funds also. They're very unwilling to lend out their federal funds to the market. Primarily banks, I should say, because this is always bank reserves. This is banks. Money market funds will come later as well. Regardless, the federal funds, the bank reserve portion it was still huge at $1.5 trillion. Somehow it was also scarce. And banks didn't want to lend to each other those funds, so the interest rate spiked. It was an issue. Federal Reserve stepped in, and notice here, before COVID, this is before COVID, actually you can't see it so much on here, but September 2019, 1.52 trillion. Now before COVID fully kicked off, January, they're already increasing it again. Got to about 1.5 trillion. January 2020, 1.7 trillion. More money was being put back into the system, which is interesting. But of course, we weren't able to see how that story would play out because of the black swan exogenous effect of COVID. Absolutely caused mayhem around the world and more money printing than ever from the Federal Reserve or any central bank for that matter. And the bank reserve portion of the monetary base went to over $4 trillion. Very jagged, you can see. They're still trying to normalize it. We had right around here, we had the Silicon Valley Bank crisis, and a few other banks had a crisis. Their reserves, their interest payments on their assets, i.e. treasuries, somehow became a little bit more expensive because the Federal Reserve was raising rates. So the Federal Reserve actually printed more money to help them out. Not in the totality of its balance sheet, which we'll get to, but as far as the bank reserve, the printed base money printed for banks, they increased it. And again, they're trying to normalize again. This is June 2024, $3.5 trillion. It's a very, again, I'm not trying to go what is right or wrong in this situation. I'm just showing you brass tacks. This is the money supply. And indeed, this is what is called the base money supply, or the monetary base. It is the bank reserves plus vault cash, that is physical cash and coin in banks, very small percentage, plus M0. M0, what is it? It is all the physical cash and coin that is outside of a bank vault. You add these two things together and you will get the monetary base. So we can see that clearly the max would be here, all right, October 2021, $2.1 trillion in M0, $4.2 trillion in bank reserves and vault cash. Add those two together, $6.3 trillion monetary base. That was about the max. And even if we look at the physical currency supply increasing, the bank reserve and vault cash supply decreased, we're at $5.6 trillion in monetary base today, whereas we were at 6.4 in $6.3 trillion in monetary base in 2021. There's a lot to this, all right? It's hard to understand why certain money supplies are where they are. Again, this goes back to the work that Paul Volcker and many Fed economists did in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. But it's better to show this M0 as a positive number, the bank reserve and vault cash as a negative number, because they're two different things, but they're both liabilities of the Federal Reserve. The genetic makeup of them is different, all right? M0, above the zero axis, M0, the gray shaded area, that's cash for us. That's cash that we can use in society. The black shaded area below the line, that's cash that's strictly reserved for institutions that have a bank charter, banks. Only they can hold bank reserves, and only they can hold vault cash, in fact. You can put your cash in a vault, but it won't count as vault cash. It's a different thing. So with this black money, banks can do things further in the economy. They can lend it out. They can create deposit liabilities. Nobody else can do this but banks. Okay, so it's a very important step in making these M1, M2, M3, indeed M3 components of the United States money supply. This is the most important section, and that is M0 and the bank reserves. Together, the monetary base. It started out as about $40 billion in 1960. Today, it is $5.6, $5.7 trillion. And as you can see with the volatility of that black shaded area, it is indeed much a more volatile, perhaps unpredictable money supply than it has ever been in the past. But again, I'm not trying to pass value judgments here. This is just how the monetary system works. This is the core of the United States dollar system. These two values, M0, 2.2 trillion, the bank reserves and the vault cash, 3.5 trillion. Both of these values are liabilities to the Federal Reserve. They're liabilities on the Federal Reserve's balance sheet. Indeed, is their main liability. As far as who holds the assets, it's two different groups. The black shaded area are the banks. They hold the assets of the bank reserves and the vault cash. The gray shaded area is the rest of us. Cash in circulation. If we hold this cash, it's a bearer instrument. It's an asset for us on our balance sheet. This could also be a company. Petty cash would be the account. A company that holds cash in its grocery store tills. But by and large, M0 is outside of the financial system. That's why it's, again, different, showing it differently here. It's outside any institution. It could be under a mattress. It could be in a personal safe. It could be in a grocery store till. By and large, it's spread out all over the economy, and so it's different. Together, this is the monetary base. M0 is not the same thing as the monetary base. To get the monetary base, you got to add up M0, cash and coin outside of banks. You got to add up vault cash, very small percentage, 6% or so of physical cash. That is cash and coin inside bank vaults. And you got to add up the bank reserve account, which is this economically the same thing, though materially very different. It's not physical, and it's obviously can only be held by banks. So there is a very important distinction there. But economically, as far as being a liability for the Federal Reserve, both of these are, and they are both analogous to money printing or destruction of money. There is no lending of this money into existence, what you might have heard in different tutorials or whatnot. That's not true. It is literally a printing or a destruction of money at its core. That is what this is. This is the monetary base. It's made of 3 components. Hope this helped you. This is the first in a series of videos on the United States money supply. Thanks for watching.